There's a judge who is well known in the community. He's not just respected for his ability to make fair decisions, but also for his compassion. He's been working as a judge for many years, and during that time, he's earned the trust of everyone who knows him. People speak highly of him, not just because of his job, but because of the kindness he shows to others. He's a man who believes in giving second chances. He believes in helping those who are willing to change. Many people who've been through his courtroom speak of how he always looks for ways to help, not just punish. He's the kind of person who believes that there's always more to a story than what you see on the surface. His reputation for being fair and kind has made him a beloved figure. But today, something unexpected is about to happen. Something that will show just how deeply he cares for people, no matter their background or situation. This day will change not only his life, but also the life of someone in need. The courtroom was like any other on that busy morning. The judge sat at his elevated bench, his eyes scanning the room, moving from one case to the next. The buzz of lawyers discussing evidence, the shuffle of papers, and the nervous whispers of the people in the gallery filled the air. It was another ordinary day in the courthouse. The judge, known for his calm and fair demeanor, had seen hundreds of cases like this one before. But there was something about today that felt different. The prosecutor stood up and called the next case. Case 346, theft by an unidentified homeless man. The judge looked up and scanned the man standing in front of him. He was a middle-aged man, hunched over, wearing ragged clothes that barely covered him. His eyes were dull and lifeless, like someone who had lost all hope in the world. The judge studied him carefully. He wasn't just another criminal. This man seemed broken, like he had been struggling for years. His clothes were torn, his face unshaven, and his hands trembled as he stood before the judge. "Sir, you have been accused of stealing food from a local store," the judge said, his voice steady but filled with concern. The man nodded, barely meeting the judge's eyes. His voice cracked as he spoke. "I was hungry. I didn't know what else to do." The judge paused for a moment, his mind racing. He'd heard plenty of excuses before, but this time, something felt different. This man wasn't trying to lie or manipulate. He was desperate. As the judge looked at him, he began to question the usual procedures. Was jail really the solution here, or was there something more he could do? The man took a deep breath and continued, his voice barely a whisper. "I didn't want to steal. I never wanted to. But I was starving. I haven't had a decent meal in days. I've been living on the streets for months, and every day feels like a struggle just to survive." The judge leaned forward, his eyes softening as he listened. The man's voice trembled as he spoke, and it was clear he wasn't just asking for sympathy. He was sharing a part of his soul. The judge could see the years of hardship written all over his face. "Tell me," the judge asked gently, "how did you end up here?" The man wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I used to have a job. I used to have a home. But then I lost everything. I got sick. I lost my job, and eventually, my family couldn't help me anymore. I ended up on the streets, trying to survive any way I could. But it gets harder every day. And today, I was just so hungry." The judge felt a wave of sadness. He'd heard stories of people losing everything, but hearing it from the man standing in front of him, feeling his pain, made it all the more real. The man wasn't a criminal. He was someone who had fallen through the cracks of society. The courtroom was silent. Everyone could sense the weight of the moment. The judge paused, his heart heavy. "Is there anyone who could help you?" the judge asked, his voice filled with concern. The man shook his head. "I've asked for help, but people just look the other way. I don't think anyone cares anymore." The judge's mind raced. He had a decision to make. The usual path would be to sentence the man to jail, but the judge couldn't shake the feeling that this was a case where something more was needed. Something deeper. Something humane. The judge sat back in his chair, his hands clasped in front of him, deep in thought. The courtroom was quiet, as if holding its breath, waiting for the judge's next move. He glanced at the man in front of him. This wasn't just another case. This wasn't about a criminal or punishment. This was about a human being in need. The judge looked around at the courtroom. Everyone was watching, waiting for him to give the usual verdict. But he couldn't do it. Not today. He stood up slowly, his robes swishing as he made his way down from the elevated bench. There was a murmur of surprise from the courtroom as the judge stepped down onto the floor, directly in front of the homeless man. The man's eyes widened. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he didn't expect this. The judge wasn't looking at him with judgment or disdain. Instead, there was something else in his eyes. Compassion. The judge knelt down slightly, looking the man in the eye. His voice was calm but firm. "I'm not going to sentence you to jail," the judge said. "Instead, I'm going to help you." The courtroom gasped, but the judge didn't pay attention to the reactions around him. He was focused on the man before him, whose expression had changed from fear to confusion. "Please, come with me," the judge continued. "We'll get you something to eat, and we'll find you a place to stay. This doesn't have to be the end of your story. You don't deserve to be punished for trying to survive." For a moment, the man just stood there, stunned. He had never imagined a judge, a person of authority, would care enough to help him like this. He had always seen people like the judge as part of a world that ignored people like him. But here he was, offering kindness. "Are you sure?" the man asked, his voice shaking with emotion. The judge nodded. "I'm sure." As the judge extended his hand, the man took it, his fingers trembling. A small, hesitant smile tugged at the corner of his lips. For the first time in a long while, he felt like someone cared. The judge led the man out of the courtroom, the eyes of the people in the gallery following them. No one moved or said a word. The unexpected turn of events left the room in stunned silence. Outside, the cold wind hit them, but the judge didn't seem to mind. He wrapped his coat tighter around himself and turned to the man. "We'll head to the shelter first. It's not far from here." The man didn't say anything at first. He just walked beside the judge, still in shock. The streets were busy as usual, but the man noticed something he hadn't for a long time. He felt less invisible. He wasn't being ignored by the judge. He wasn't being judged by society. For the first time in years, he felt like he mattered. When they arrived at the shelter, the warm lights greeted them. The judge knew the staff there well, having worked with them on community outreach programs before. As they walked in, the workers looked up in surprise at the sight of the judge with the homeless man. The judge spoke to the manager, explaining the situation. "This man needs a hot meal, a warm place to sleep, and a fresh start. Can you help him?" Without hesitation, the manager nodded. "Of course, we'll take care of him." The judge turned to the man, who was standing there, overwhelmed. "Go inside, get yourself something warm to eat. I'll make sure you have everything you need tonight." The man hesitated for a moment, unsure if he was dreaming. This kindness, this gesture, it felt too good to be true. But he didn't argue. He stepped inside, the warmth of the building washing over him as he walked toward the food line. A volunteer handed him a steaming plate of soup, and the man's hands shook as he took it. It wasn't just the cold that made his hands tremble. It was the realization that someone who could easily have ignored him, had chosen to help. The judge stood by the door for a moment, watching as the man sat down at a table, his face softening. The homeless man looked up, meeting the judge's eyes. A small, grateful smile spread across his face. "Thank you," he said quietly, the words thick with emotion. The judge smiled back, nodding. "You don't need to thank me. I'm just doing what anyone should do when they see someone in need. But you're the one who has to take the first step. You're the one who has to want to change." As the judge turned to leave, he knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. He had seen the man's potential, and now, it was time for the man to see it in himself. The judge had made his choice. He wasn't just offering food or shelter. He was offering hope. The judge didn't leave immediately. He stayed at the shelter for a little while, talking to the staff, and making sure the man was settled. He wanted to be certain that the homeless man had everything he needed. The judge knew the shelter was a good place, but he also knew it wouldn't be enough on its own. The man needed more than just food and warmth. He needed guidance. After some time, the judge went to the man, who was sitting in a small, quiet corner of the shelter, slowly eating his soup. His shoulders were less hunched, and there was a slight shift in his posture. Maybe it was the food, maybe it was the safety of the shelter, but the man looked a little more alive than he had earlier that day. The judge sat down across from him, "How are you doing?" he asked, his voice gentle. The man looked up, still hesitant, but now more open. "I'm okay. I never thought I'd be here, you know?" he said, his voice softer now, less filled with despair. "I thought nobody would ever help me." The judge nodded, understanding. "I know, it's not easy for people in your position, but you don't have to do it alone." There was silence for a moment. The man seemed to be thinking deeply. Finally, he spoke again. "I don't even know where to start. Everything's so messed up. I don't think I can fix it." The judge leaned forward slightly. "It's not about fixing everything overnight. It's about taking small steps, one step at a time. Do you want to try?" The man hesitated, then nodded. "I don't know if I can, but I'll try. I don't want to be on the streets anymore. I don't want to live like this." "That's the first step," the judge said with a reassuring smile. "And we'll take it together. I know people who can help. I'll connect you with a program that can help you get back on your feet. They'll help you find work, find a place to live, but it's up to you to take the first step, and I'll be here to support you." The man looked at him with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. "You're really going to help me?" The judge nodded. "I won't leave you to face this alone. You deserve a chance, just like anyone else." The man's eyes filled with tears, but this time, they weren't tears of hopelessness. They were tears of relief. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he had a future. The judge stood up, placing a hand on the man's shoulder. "I'll check in with you tomorrow. Just remember, you're not invisible anymore." The homeless man nodded, his expression slowly transforming. Something had shifted within him. For the first time in years, he felt hope. And maybe, just maybe, he could build a new life. Over the next few weeks, the homeless man's transformation was nothing short of remarkable. The shelter provided him with food and a safe place to sleep. But more than that, he began to believe in himself again. The programs the judge had connected him with helped him get back on his feet. He started attending job training courses, learning new skills, and brushing up on old ones. The staff at the shelter were supportive, but it was the judge's continued encouragement that made the biggest difference. The man would often find himself thinking about the judge's words. "You're not invisible." He had to keep trying, one step at a time. It wasn't easy. There were days when he felt discouraged, when it seemed like nothing was going right. But each time he thought about giving up, he remembered the judge's kindness. He remembered the warmth of the soup and the words of hope that had been offered to him that day in the shelter. One morning, he walked into the shelter with a smile on his face. He had just landed his first part-time job at a local hardware store. The man was nervous but excited. It was a small step, but it was a huge one for him. He called the judge right after he got the news. "I got the job," he said, his voice trembling with excitement. "I really did it." The judge's voice came through the phone, calm but full of pride. "I knew you could. It's just the beginning, but it's a big step. Keep going." The man felt something stir inside him. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he had control over his future. The weight of his past still lingered, but it didn't feel as heavy anymore. He was moving forward, and that was enough. Months passed, and the man's life changed in ways he had never imagined. He no longer wandered the streets, hungry and lost. He had a steady job at the hardware store, a small but cozy apartment, and a new sense of pride in himself. His days of struggling just to survive were behind him. One afternoon, the man walked into the courthouse, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't sure if the judge would even remember him, but he had to come. He had something important to say. When he found the judge in his chambers, he was greeted with a warm smile. The judge stood up and extended his hand. "It's good to see you. How have you been?" The man smiled shyly, his eyes bright with gratitude. "I'm doing well. I wanted to thank you. I know I can never fully repay you for what you did for me, but I just needed you to know, you changed my life. You gave me hope when I had none." The judge nodded, his eyes soft. "You did all the hard work. I just gave you a little push when you needed it. I'm proud of you." The man took a deep breath, his emotions overwhelming him. "I've got a place to live now. I'm paying my rent on time. I've even started saving a little. And I'm not on the streets anymore. I just wanted you to know that." The judge smiled. "I knew you could do it. I'm proud of you for not giving up." The The man paused for a moment, then looked at the judge. "You gave me a chance when no one else would. I'll never forget that." The judge's eyes twinkled with quiet pride. "And you gave yourself a chance too. You deserve everything that's coming your way." As the man left the courthouse that day, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. His life wasn't perfect, but it was his now. And it all started with one person who took the time to care.